Jerusalem and the coast of Tyre and Sidon. They had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases, and those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured. And everyone in the crowd was trying to touch him, for power came out from him and healed all of them. Then he looked up at his disciples and said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you, revile you, and defame you on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice on that day and leap for joy, for surely your reward is great in heaven, for that is how their ancestors treated the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. Woe to you who are laughing now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when all speak well of you, for that is how their ancestors treated the false prophets. But I say to you who are listening, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who asks of you, and if anyone takes away what is yours, do not ask for it back again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you expect to receive payment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. Instead, love your enemies, do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, for he himself is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful." May God add blessing to the reading, hearing, and living of these words. Amen.
As we know, the world is not as it should be. It's not as we want it to be. It's not as God dreams for it to be. The evil of injustice and oppression are seemingly everywhere. Easy examples. Last week we said there are, something like 14 million children in our country don't know where the next meal is coming from, suffer from food scarcity. This week's example comes from our neighbors to the west when the Iowa legislature this week voted to strip all civil rights from transgender folks. They even just straight up said to a whole group of people, you don't get to be fully human. What's even crazier about that is that it includes one of their colleagues. The Iowa House has a legislator who's a transgender woman. And she gave a rousing speech against the bill and got a standing ovation for it. And then immediately after that, her colleagues proceeded to vote for the bill, pass the bill anyway. Just straight up saying to people, you don't get to be fully human in our state. The world is not as it should be. The world is not as God dreams for it to be. The world is not as we've been called to create it. Every member of this church and every member of every United Methodist church there is has made the vow to resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves. If you've ever been here for a baptism, even if you haven't been so yourself, even if you're not a member, if you've been here for a baptism or a membership, you've heard those vows. They're central to who we are as a denomination. Resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves. So how will we do that? How will we bring about the better world that we want, the better world that we see is possible if we squint and look with our Jesus-colored eyes? How will we create that world that we've been called to create? Historically, there are a whole lot of answers to that question. And I promise there's a multiverse version of this sermon where I would go down a detour and we'd spend the next 20 minutes looking at some of those. But I'm resisting the urge to do that. I'll just say this tiny little teaser here, that at least one of those other answers will play a pretty big role in Holy Week. So there's your little nugget for, 6 weeks from now. Instead, let's review the biblical thread that we've been latching onto. We said this is the heart of this series, the heart of the answer to how do we create the world that God intends, that God calls us to create. Well, it's by getting in some good trouble. The story of the people of God begin with Abraham and Sarah. God calls them to go to a new place, and he gives them the mission not to destroy everybody else, not to eliminate all their enemies, but that they will be blessed in order to be a blessing, that the entire world will be blessed through them. That's the beginning of the story. Now we know the story of people God gets a little waylaid, to say the least, in Egypt. When the people are enslaved in Egypt. And so we need some heroes, and not the type that we're used to seeing, but some heroes that will rise up and resist in creative ways. And that's what we get in the midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. Remember this a few weeks ago? We stopped in Exodus and we said, the midwives get named, the Pharaoh doesn't. And what do? They engage in acts that stand up, that speak up, that get in the way of the evil of slavery and of Pharaoh's decree to kill all the children. They defy, don't comply when given a death-dealing order. But they do so in creative, nonviolent ways. They do so through lampooning the ridiculousness of the Pharaoh. They do so through, let's face it, some big, beautiful, bald-faced lies right to Pharaoh's face to protect their people, to defy the death-dealing order. Lampooning and lies, sure, but not violence. They got in good trouble. They got in the way in creative, nonviolent ways. Later, Israel is established. So much so that they are beginning to neglect, well, not beginning, it's been a problem since, humanity. Neglecting the marginalized among them. The Bible often uses the refrain, the widows, the orphans, and the strangers, or the aliens, or the immigrants. These are the folks that are marginalized in society that you continually neglect. The prophets tell the people over and over and over again. We read it in Micah, we read it in Amos, you can find it in multiple others. But essentially, the idea, as we read, was it doesn't matter to God how amazing your worship is. It doesn't matter how fat your offering is. It doesn't matter how perfectly pitched your music is. It doesn't matter how amazingly enlightening your sermons are. It doesn't matter how great your worship is if it's not connected to the real world, if it's not also connected to caring for the least and the last among you. It doesn't matter to God. In fact, the scriptures say over and over again, God rejects our worship, no matter how great it is on Sunday, if the very next day and the rest of the week, we're neglecting our workers, we're oppressing, adding to the oppression of the marginalized. You can't worship God one day and oppress your workers the next. And we saw then Jesus pick up that thread. Take that thread from the Hebraic prophetic tradition when he quoted Isaiah in his first public sermon. You remember the one. He sits down, he gets the scroll, and he sits down and he says, he reads it, the day of the Lord is upon me, and come to bring sight to the blind and release to the oppressed. And we see him take that nonviolent thread when he stops quoting Isaiah, when Isaiah gets to the part about the day of God's vengeance. Because Jesus knew from the very beginning and demonstrated from the very beginning of his ministry that violence is not the way of God. Can you find verses that support that? Of course. And that's part of that multiverse version that we're not going down that road today. But of course you can find other threads. The Bible's a library, not a single book by a single author. It's a library, and the books are often in contention with each other. But the thread that Jesus picks up is the one that has people getting in some good trouble. Stand up, speak out, get in the way in creative, nonviolent methods. And so Jesus grabs that hook, that thread, and he uses the phrase to some poor fishermen. We're going to have you what? Fish for people. Yes, fish for men, fish for people. A phrase that doesn't mean go invite your friends to church. It was connected to the Hebraic prophetic tradition of bringing the rich and the haughty down from their place and raising up the lowly. A tradition that's echoed in Mary's song to Jesus, a tradition that he picks up and carries on further. Good trouble. The late civil rights leader and Congressman John Lewis, that was the term he coined. Good trouble for speaking up, speaking out, getting in the way of evil and justice, but doing so in creative, non-violent methods. That's what Schiffer and Pua did, that's what Micah and Amos did, and it's what Jesus did. So what were those tactics that Jesus employed? That's where today's gospel story comes in. Got the thread, we're tempted to go bring them down, and that, I gotta tell you, that's a pretty violent image, isn't it? Like fishing for people, putting the hooks and the fish hooks in their mouth. It's a pretty violent image. So what does Jesus do with that? Turns out he subverts it. You've heard this before, yes? How do you respond to violence? Turn the other cheek. You've heard this, yes? We've read it all the time. It's in the famous verse in Matthew, the famous teaching called the Sermon on the Mount. Yes, exactly. Here Luke gives us a slightly different version, but they're parallels. From that, we've often been told, turn the other cheek, give your extra shirt, go the extra mile. And it's been presented most times in most places. The implication is to be a doormat. Let people stomp all over you. Do nothing to resist. In fact, if you read the Matthew version, the text even says, Jesus saying, do not resist an evildoer. Here's the thing, though. That word that we so often translate as resist, what's a pretty poor translation? That word resist is really a technical word for warfare, for when two armies march together and face off against one another. It's so much more than resist. It's warfare. It's violent imagery. When Jesus says don't resist, what he's really saying is don't make violent war against your enemies. That's a very, very different statement, is it not? So what are these tactics then? What have we been taught? Well, this, my friends, requires some demonstrations. So, fortunately for us, we have a group that I have so helpfully dubbed the Not Quite Ready for Prime Time Players. They're going to help us make sense of this teaching. So, Jennifer and Alex, come on up. Now, Jesus says, when someone strikes you, turn the other cheek. Now, what's the situation in which you're striking someone? Is it, oh no boy, Marcus of Queensberry rules, eh? No, that's not what Jesus is talking about. Is it, oh, well, hey, it's, jets and sharks, and it's a gang war, a fist fight. No, that's not what Jesus is talking about either. Because, especially in the Matthew verse, Jesus says when someone strikes you on the right cheek, for those of us that are directionally challenged, Alex, which one is your right cheek? What? Try again. Which one's your right cheek? Your right, not stage right. Which one's your right cheek? That one. Okay. Jennifer, if you're going to strike him on the right cheek, if you're going to strike him, what are you going to do? If you're going to strike him naturally, what's your natural thing to do to hit him? Well, to hit him. Just to hit him. Just to hit him. Right, okay, but that's not what we're talking about. Because if you hit him straight on, that's what equals do. That's a fist fight. This, okay, what about left hand? Can you hit him with your left hand? I mean, you kind of could, but it's not your strongest hand. And here's one of those weird quirks of culture. In ancient Palestine and Roman Empire, actually it was a rule, you couldn't be left-handed and be in the army. You couldn't use your left hand in public, because the left hand was for unclean acts. Yeah, so you don't even use your left hand, so use your right hand. How are you going to hit his right cheek? You're going to backhand him. What's the situation in which one person backhands another? Do it. Yeah. It's putting somebody in their place. When you have a position of authority over someone else and you want to put them in their place, you want to remind them of who they are and who they aren't, you give them that backhand. This is slave owner to slave. This is man to woman. This is man to child. This is soldier to peasant in first century Palestine. Somebody hits you on the right cheek. Jesus is talking about when one person who thinks they're superior to another is trying to put a person in their place. So what's his instruction to do? Give them your left cheek also. Turn your other cheek toward them. Okay, Jennifer. Now what are you going to do? You can't hit him with your right hand. You're with your left hand. You can slug him, but then that's making him an equal. So, can you backhand him from there? Yeah. Right? Do you see what he's done here? Do you see how he's switched the power? Do you see how he's gone from a person who's been put in their place to one who has recaptured his own dignity? Now, it may very well he gets slugged. It may very well be he gets flogged. Like, this isn't a safety move. This is a power move in the Jesus way. This is reclaiming power and dignity. How does it feel when you turn that other cheek? Level. Yeah. And you've got a choice to make.
And I would have to either...
You've got to either full-on slug him, in which case he's proved his point that there you are on equal footing, or you're going to walk away frustrated. Can you see how the last thing this is a call to be a doormat? You see how perverse and wrong and evil it is that this verse has been used to tell, especially women and children who've been beaten in their own homes, they have to just sit there and take it. That is the exact opposite of what Jesus is saying here. He's offering a tactic for creative, nonviolent resistance to violent oppression. Nicely done. Very good. Okay, what's our second situation that Jesus calls about? Oh yes, when someone asks for your cloak, when someone asks for your outer garment, give them your inner garment as well. What's the situation here? This is Jesus is talking about in a court. Now, who gets brought to court in ancient Palestine? Poor folks. Poor folks who can't pay on a loan. What are we in court for today?
This guy owes me a lot of money. He hasn't made one payment. He needs to pay what he owes me.
Is this true?
The price of eggs. My wife takes all my money. My son takes all my money. I've got nothing left to give.
Got nothing left to give. In Jesus' day, so many folks had lost their ancestral home. The land is supposed to be the inheritance for the people of God, the people of Israel, but it gets taken away, and then whatever income they might have disappears in taxes and tariffs, and thank God we don't have that problem anymore. But in that day, eventually they become sharecroppers in their own, what's supposed to be their own land. And so eventually there's nothing left but the clothes on their body. They own nothing else. And so the law said the one who's owed money could ask for the outer garment.
I will take the outer garment. But I will give it back to you tonight to keep you warm.
Now, it turns out that's a piece of the law. You read it in Deuteronomy 24. The law says, well, yeah, okay, if you get to this point, we're going to take care of the poor person by letting them have their cloak back at night because it's cold at night. You don't want to sleep without some covers, right? So Jesus says in this situation where everything's been stripped from you, if they're going to take your coat, might as well give them your shirt too.
See if I can get this up there.
This is all I needed.
No. You can have that coat.
No.
You can have my sweater. Here's my shoes. We'll give you my
Oh, I'm sorry. Does that make you uncomfortable? Thank you. That's the exact point Jesus is making. He's saying when you get taken to court and you have nothing on you but your clothes, you might as well strip naked in the court. In those days, they only had two garments: the outer garment and the inner garment. There wasn't like a bunch of other clothes they had on. You give your outer cloak and you give your inner garment, you're naked in court now. One, in an honor and shame society like existed then, the shame of seeing nakedness falls on those seeing it, not on the naked one. Do you see once again how Jesus is subverting the unjust structure to point out, in this case, to lay bare the injustice in the system? There is no chance for the poor person to win this court battle. The laws are stacked against the poor folks and for the rich folks. Again, thank God we've solved that problem.
Yeah.
This is Jesus offering creative, nonviolent tactics for exposing the injustice in the system and bringing back some dignity. Right? It is, but it is a way of showing the world the injustice that's in the system, the way poor folks are marginalized in this system, the way they have no chance. It brings, in spite of appearances, it brings dignity back to the one who had been literally and figuratively stripped of their humanity. Thank you, you two. Now, what's the third instance? Jesus says when somebody asks for you to carry their pack for a mile, give it 2. Now, as it happens, we happen to have a genuine, authentic Roman soldier pack here. Well, you don't think the Roman Empire in Italy had a contract with the Marini? Okay, so what's this talking about? Is this just like Jesus saying, hey, be a nice person? Be nice. Be nice. What happens? Actually, what this is about in first century Palestine, Roman soldiers were everywhere, and they could conscript someone to carry their pack.
Citizen, carry my pack for 1 mile, as the law suggests.
I have work in the fields. I don't have.
I'm sorry, the law says you must carry my pack for 1 mile.
Now, in a sense, there's a little bit of mercy in that law. It was the law. She had to carry it, but only for a mile. This is the law. They have to carry it. Now, who knows what kind of conversation they have along the way, but this was a common and despised practice throughout the Roman Empire.
You merchant.
What
Carry
happens?
that pack.
Now, here's another thing. The Roman Empire had mile markers, just like we see on the interstate. They had mile markers. What happens when they get to the mile marker? When that 1 mile is up?
Okay, give me my pack. Wait,
No, I'm going to keep going.
wait, give me my pack. Hey, that was 1 mile.
Are you the centurion?
Okay, hold on. Before we get to the centurion, do you see the humor in this situation? All of a sudden, a Roman soldier is practically running after a peasant, begging them for their pack back. If we're not laughing at this, we don't get it. It's meant to be humorous. Now, occasionally along the way, our centurions, the soldiers that are above, they're over 100 soldiers, like the middle manager, essentially, right? The boss. And what happens when the peasant carrying the pack extra finds that centurion?
Centurion, I'm on my second mile carrying a pack.
Excuse me.
Yes.
The law says 1 mile. Why are you making them carry it for 2 miles? Now you're not doing your job.
Oh, okay, well, I...
Scold.
And that's what could happen. The soldier didn't know. It could be any variety of punishments. It could be a lack of taking rations away. It could be you got to sleep outside the fortification. If the soldier's the centurion's buddy, maybe it's just nothing. But in this instance, suddenly the soldier the oppressor who's used to predictability, who knows what's going to happen, that ground is gone from under their feet. All right, let's hear it for our not quite ready for prime time players. Thank you very much. Is it sinking in? Do you see how this is the furthest thing from instructions on being a doormat? No, this is getting in good trouble. This is speaking up and speaking out and getting in the way of evil and injustice and oppression in creative, nonviolent ways. That's the good news. Here's the bad news. Those are tactics that would have worked in Jesus' day. Those are specific tactics that would have worked in Jesus' day for a time. How many people would strip naked in court before somebody is expecting it and does something about it? How many times would soldiers, I'm sure the soldiers would talk, how many times does somebody carry the pack an extra mile before the soldiers are ready for it? These are not singular tactics to be used by all people in all places at all times. Man, I wish it were that easy. Instead, what we're given are principles. Called to find our own tactics for creative, nonviolent resistance to violent oppression. Instead, what we're given is a call to use the resources available to us and in us to be people who get in good trouble. We have to find our own tactics, individually and together. This call is up to us to continue this thread, to pick up this thread that comes to us through the ancestors, through the prophets, through Jesus, to us. Do you notice at the very beginning of the reading, the text says Jesus came down to a level place in order to give a teaching about leveling the playing field for people who are oppressed. I don't think that's on accident. How will we move forward in ways that get in good trouble, that lift up the marginalized in our society? I don't want you to go away empty-handed, so let me offer one possible tactic that we can use. There's an organization called Braver Angels, and they're dedicated to having conversations, civil conversations with people who disagree with each other. Now, I know we don't have any of those in this congregation, of course. But outside of this building, there are, I don't know if you've heard, some disagreements, some division among the peoples. This is one organization that is committed to having civil, honest conversations across divides in ways that honor the humanity of each one. That's one solution. That's one tactic. The rest, my friends, is up to you and me and us. Will you get in some good trouble with me? Amen. May it be so.